Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Everyday is Saturday. I'm Matt Stahl, along with my partner, Brad Gatto.
Hello, Mr. Matt Stahl.
Nice. Always a surprise. Yeah. We have a special episode in store today. We have a guest with us. I'm gonna create a little bit of mystery, and we're gonna introduce our guest shortly here. But before we get into that, Brad, what have you been up to?
Well, we were just talking about this before we hit record. It's almost spring here. It feels like spring, and so spring cleaning.
Yes.
As fun as that sounds, that's what I've been up to. We did get on a spring break, and I did your quintessential all-inclusive, so ate too much, drank too much. Got a little bit of a tan, so I feel pretty good about that. But
beat me in that game.
Yeah. That's the Italian blood. I tan up pretty good. But otherwise, we're just kind of getting ready for spring to be here, and baseball just started. First practice was last night, so the marathon that is summer baseball in our household is kicking off. How about you?
Very similar. So lots of spring cleaning.
We're so interesting.
Right. We were on spring break the same time you were. Saw the sun. And our baseball, or your baseball, is our soccer. So we're transitioning to outdoor soccer with our 4 little soccer players. So
we're whatever 80 episodes into our podcast, and
it's pretty much soccer.
Every time I ask you what's going on in your life, I think 79 out of 80 times you said soccer. So
and for you, it's baseball. So
yeah,
it's a little more variety.
Awesome. Well, we do have a special guest. Every now and again on our podcast episodes, we have guests on. It's always fun to have guests, get different perspective, different voice. And we're doing something a little different today.
Yeah.
We're having a competitor on. I don't know too many other advisors that would have their competitors or another advisor on, especially somebody that works with similar type clients and has a similar independent type practice. But at the end of the day, every now and again, you just find other people that are doing things similar to you, but can provide a different perspective and add value. And so at the risk of bringing a competitor on, we always want to do what's in our clients and our listeners' best interest. And if we think that somebody can provide value or a different perspective that we don't have, we want to do that. And so today, without further ado, we have Jennifer Lee with us. Jennifer, can you say hi to all of our listeners?
Hey, everybody. Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. Jennifer is obviously a financial advisor, lives down in the state of Florida now, but that's not where you started, and that's not your whole story. So Jennifer, can you just give our listeners a little bit of a backstory into who you are in your business?
It's wonderful that we're all 3 on this call and that we can collaborate. So oftentimes that happens behind the scenes at conferences, but not necessarily in front of your target audience. So thank you for having me on, and I trust that we'll give some valuable content. So I am 28 years in the business. I grew up, I'm 53. You could say I was 53 years in the business because my father was in the industry, and I grew up with.
To be clear, we didn't ask you to share your age. That was not a requirement coming into the podcast. You volunteered that information.
You can dub that out. That'd be great. No, I'm just saying that it's been a long time coming. I grew up in the business with my father, experiencing working with clients from many, many years ago. So I love it. It's not really work for me. I'm sure much like you guys.
Yeah.
It's a labor of love. We love to work with our clients and really understand them and support them and help them be their best selves. So I've been doing this for 28 years professionally. About 13 years ago, I moved to Florida and kind of tightened up my practice niche, and that's really women in financial transition. And during COVID, I was able to put together a book and publish a book called Squeeze the Juice. And I really love that book because it talks about taking care of your family and whatever that means to you. And it talks about just getting the best out of whatever environment and whatever situation, whether it's that soccer game or that baseball conversation with one of your kids or this podcast.
Yeah.
Get the juice.
I have a question out of pure curiosity. So was this book brewing for years and you'd traded the content, or was it one sprint?
Oh, I love when an advisor asks this question because I don't know about you guys, but my marketing person said, you have to write a book. And I said, I'd rather do your tax return. I'm not writing a book. Are you crazy? We do numbers. That doesn't make any sense to me. And she had said to me, she said, look, you have all kinds of stories that are illustrative of what you do and people can understand and it brings context to it. You've done this for years. Just write it down. And I said, I fought her. She said, all right, just write 10 pages and give it to me. And then she said, okay, well, I don't really understand where you're coming from. So expand that out. And so it went on, but
you got totally tricked in the writing book.
I got tricked. And thank God I had an editor and, they sent me the 2 files and they said, only read the first file. And I said, okay. It was like, read the first file, see if you like it, and then look at the second file. Well, the second file had red marks everywhere, all the adjustments in the English language that, proper English and so on. So I'm very proud that it's complete and that hopefully it's an easy read.
Yeah. Love it. By the way, for the listeners, we're going to circle back to your niche about women in transition, because I think that's important and actually it's the number one reason I wanted to have you on the podcast, because although I'm not a woman, a passion of mine to help women in transition as well, having been raised by a single mother. That being said, going back to the book, as a fellow author who went through what I viewed as the painful process of writing a book, because I'm also not an author, by definition of what you would think of. So you talked about being a little bit forced into it by the people around you that care about you, that know that you had something to say. I'm curious that as the process went on, did you find your voice? Did you find passion in it? And at some point, did it not become so much work of like, gosh, I can't believe they're making me do this, to a point of like, okay, now I can see clearly the vision of where this is going to go. And are you excited now that you did it?
Thank you for that question. Absolutely. I mean, in the beginning, it was more of a challenge, but after the 10 pages and then I started fleshing it out, I love it.
Yeah.
My book, it starts with my family love letter that was delivered in person from my father after he had been given a diagnosis of a stage 4 brain tumor. And he called a family meeting with all of my siblings and my mom, and we sat on the rooftop of a house in North Carolina, and he told us, he said, look, I don't talk to you about money, but here's what your mother will have. Here are my expectations of you. Here's who I want to give my eulogy. Here's who I want to sing at my funeral and what I want them to sing. I've enjoyed my life. I know God. I love my business, all of these things that, that's, your love letter to your family does not replace the legal documents that you need, but it's a nice introduction to them. And it's a way for you guys as advisors to have those hard conversations with clients about making sure they take care of their family and what's that going to look like. And so it starts with that. And then we talk about different stories. And then I end with my love letter so that you can see why I do what I do and why I put in this amount of life insurance. Well, here's the different kinds you could have. And don't spend all the money, only use the earnings. Don't give the nieces and nephews money to buy a car, but teach them to fish. All of those things that are your tribal knowledge that we know as advisors, it's just a natural space. But it's just a way of communicating. So I hope that there's value in it to the reader, and it feels good to have accomplished that.
Really striking a chord with me. I've been talking about this for a long time. So the concept of, you call it a family love letter, just this concept of, I've used the term like a family doctrine, which I like love letter so much more because this doctrine sounds so buttoned up and official.
Possibly negative.
Possibly negative, yeah. But it's such a cool concept, and I think it's such a great way to ground people and reminding them of why this is really, really important. So I just think that's amazing.
I'm curious, if you don't mind sharing, how long ago was it that sit down with your dad was? And then is there anything that you can point back to that changed the way that you advise based on that experience?
Well, it was before the book. So it was several years before the book. So certainly that was part of what I wanted to communicate to people. So certainly that I lead with that in conversations with new relationships or new prospective clients, because I need to really understand the whole story as you do. We need to understand what drives them, not just our assets and how do we allocate it and what does that look like and what's the income it's going to generate, but why do you want it? And what is it that you want? And how does that feel? And all those components. And then who's going to take care of the spouse if they're non-moneyed, if they're the party that does not really want to talk about finance or isn't interested? How do we make sure that they're educated and protected and prepared so that they can live on?
Yeah. Love it. Well, let's transition to this kind of niche that you've created over the last handful of years or longer, women in transition. So first of all, define for the listeners what that even means. What is a woman in transition?
I'll just tell you a quick funny part, and then I'll give you my little elevator speech. So when I relocated to Florida, I would go to some networking events and I would say, "Hi, I'm a financial advisor." And women would lean away from me and say, "My husband handles that," or "I have one of you." And that was a little bit of a shocker, right? So I was like, "Well, wait a minute, you don't have one of me because I'm so unique." And number two, even if your husband handles it, you probably should have your finger on the pulse of what's going on. Whether you know the ins and outs of the investments, you certainly know what the goals are and what you're trying to do for your family. So I really had to step back and take a minute and think about what it is that I do. So now when somebody asks me, "Well, what do you do?" I say, "I work with women in financial transition." And they go, "Well, what does that mean?" So, well, I find that women that are going through divorce, maybe have a loss of a spouse, buying or selling a business, huge changes in their life, have a lot of balls in the air, and they need to create a path forward. And that's my job, is to help them assess where they are and create a path forward so they can go confidently. And they're like, "Oh, that makes so much more sense to me. I get it." And they don't run away scared telling me that their husband handles that. So that's really what it means. It's when emotions crash into money, right? It's that financial impact where you have to deal with it. You lost your spouse, you're getting a divorce, you really have to address all those things.
What was the moment that clicked where you decided that's the path you wanted to go down? Is there a particular moment that stands out?
It was after those conversations and those people leaning away from me, certainly. But what I did was I looked at my entire practice and I looked at the people, as an advisor, we talk about segmenting your book and those kind of things, looking at what are the similarities. And I just realized that this is who I wanted to work with. These are my favorite clients. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Simon Sinek.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And the power of why. So I did the why. And that's part of my little shtick about what I do, because I really had to get to the bottom line. What is my why? What drives me? Well, it's supporting women who are, for the most part, maybe an ostrich when it comes to money. They'd rather stick their head in the sand than deal with it. And I try to make it palatable.
Yeah. So let's talk practically or pragmatically about that. What are some things that are maybe different, or some blocking and tackling things that these women that we're discussing in transition, whether that be through death of a spouse, divorce, or just any other life transition, that they need to be thinking about that the average person doesn't? Like, is there anything that stands out to you that's different for them?
The easy answer is, it's all the same, right? It's all the same moving parts. It's what are your assets and income and your resources, and what do you want? That's our job, is to figure out what's in between. So it's all the same from that perspective, but there's a lot of soft skill. There's a lot of reading through what the goal is and the objective is and trying to break it down in terms of numbers, because often this non-money party doesn't think in terms of the financial calculations for that. They just think in terms of the stuff. So, you're going through a divorce and you're going from 2 incomes in one household to 2 households and income in each household. It's scary, and the numbers are different. You can't have maybe you have enough resources that you can have 2 big houses, but many, many times you don't. So it's a mental adjustment, and you have to, as an advisor, I have to talk to them and understand, is that house really that important to finish raising your children in? Is it okay that you're going to be house poor, right? Is that really where you want to be? Or are you willing to downsize a little bit so you have some freedom and some flexibility? What's important to you? And some people will be dead set and say, "I need that house. That's it. That's all." Okay, then you're going to suffer over here. So we have to really help them make solid decisions that are going to serve them and their family and their new life. And I think that can be scary. As far as the loss of a spouse, again, the same thing is true in whether you lose your wife or you lose your husband. You shouldn't be making any big decisions for 6 months. You can be talking about them. We can be laying out the foundations. We may need to make sure you have income right away so that we can structure things so that you can continue to live. But in the niche that I work with, primarily, it's not just women. It's women who are, I use that term, non-moneyed. And what I mean by that is they're certainly intelligent enough. They're more than capable of absorbing the concepts. They're just not that interested. So our job is to make it as absorbable as possible and then create, things that make sense for them and their family moving forward.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Matt. I'm going to see if you remember. What are when you talk about the things, why people should hire an advisor, and it's if they have a lack of some of it's knowledge, but what are your components?
So it's time, desire, discipline, knowledge there. So
it could be, in your instance, it's not even about knowledge. It could be a desire issue or a time issue. I don't want to do it. I'm not interested in it. It's not that I couldn't understand it. It's just that I choose not to. Right. And I think that's true for a lot of people. A lot of people hire advisors not because they couldn't figure out the spreadsheet side of this world. It's because it's the time, energy, and effort, especially if you're talking about transition in the middle of a divorce, in the middle of a death. Is this really what you want to be doing? Like, is this where you want to spend your time, is like figuring out the spreadsheet side of your life? Or do you want to grieve the loss of a relationship, grieve the loss of a spouse, something like that? It's important to have somebody that can kind of watch your six, so to speak, so that you can deal with the things that you want to deal with or just frankly have to deal with at that time of your life.
Absolutely.
So in working with, and kind of creating this niche out of, I don't know if you call it necessity, but it almost sounds like that as a part of your story of like, hey, look, I see the need for this. And it's that whole like see a need, meet a need. What's been the most rewarding part for you?
Often when I do a talk, just generally and do a talk and I talk about the ostrich, women will come up to me after a talk and they'll say, I felt like you were talking directly to me. And that happens more often than not now when they come up and they say, where were you when I was going through my divorce? Right. So now that I'm doing these podcasts, this outward marketing in this specific area, I get calls from people. I'm in Sarasota, Florida. I get calls from California. I get calls from Michigan. I get calls from anywhere. I even got an overseas call. So I'm like, I can talk to you for a few minutes, but I'm not allowed to, give advice for somebody who's out of the country. So it's that satisfaction in meeting that need before they make mistakes, right? To walk with them through that process. So sometimes it's a long process. Divorce can be contentious. I hope that people, if they're going through a divorce, will be able to look at each other and say, you used to be the love of my life. I don't want to hate you, and we have kids together, and how are we going to figure this out economically and move on? But that's not always the case. Yeah. And so it takes a village to get them through a divorce attorney, someone like myself or you guys, and oftentimes a therapist or a coach to help keep them focused on the things that they need to be doing and not get emotionally distracted where it's going to be toxic.
We're both really big fans of behavioral finance side of financial planning. And so when you talk about being in transition, you said something before, which I grabbed a hold of. You said, don't make any decisions for 6 months. Mm-hmm. With my limited experience in helping clients when they're dealing with the death of a spouse, like that just turned on a light bulb where it was like, it's disorienting. Like they're in a completely different spot. So how much of the behavioral finance side of things comes into the planning for you in that process?
I think it's central. I think the mental and emotional state of the person just with anything else. You think about your kids. I mean, if your kids are hungry or they're irritable, you can't have a conversation with them about doing their homework and increasing their grades. You got to wait until they're in a better space. So it's just like we're human, right? So we have to be able to look at people. I was meeting with a couple a number of years ago, and a husband and wife, and we were talking about an investment, and his ears got all red, and he was clearly uncomfortable. And I said, you know what? We're not going to do this today. I want you to think about it and let me know when you're ready. Right. So you have to be able to see them beyond, okay, here's where you're going to sign and here's what we're going to do. And this is going to help you. Yes, it is. But it needs to make sure that they're present and they're in a good space. So.
Yeah, the language that Matt and I use around that is reasonable and rational. What's rational on a spreadsheet may not always be reasonable for a client, and trying to find that intersection can be very, very tough. And it's that's different for people in transition, especially women in transition through the loss of a marriage or the loss of a spouse. So super interesting. I want to end the podcast by circling back to the book and talking a little bit more about that. But one of the things, and so that's how we'll end. But before that, one of the things Matt and I like to do when we have guests on is what we call 5 fast questions. We don't prepare these questions ahead of time. They're nothing to do with financial planning necessarily. They're just 5 fun questions or fast questions to kind of keep you on your toes and fun and interesting for the listeners. And so we're going to go through that really quick. I didn't even tell you we're going to do this because extemporaneous podcasts are far more fun than scripted ones. So Matt and I are just going to ask you 5 fun or fast questions. We want your gut reaction to these questions. And then we'll end with talking a little bit more about your book and how people can find it. So I'll start because it was my idea, and I'm going to give you a second to think of a question.
I'm totally nervous, so hurry up. Go.
You should be. No, I'm kidding.
They're going to be pretty deep.
So most people that are hearing this are going to be listening to it. So they're not going to know this. So I'm going to describe to the listeners, you're sitting in I'm assuming this is your office.
Yes.
Behind you, there is a painting. I think it's an octopus. Am I right?
It is. Yes.
So why do you have a picture? First question, why do you have a picture of an octopus hanging in your office?
That's a good one. I don't know. I'm drawn to octopi. And
Nice.
Did you know that if you put an octopus in a jar and put a lid on it, it can unscrew the lid?
Really?
Nope.
Yeah, they're smart. So I like to say I got 8 tentacles and I'm smart. I can get out of a jar.
There you go.
I don't know.
The answer was ready. You had it ready.
This was a great.
No, it was not prepped. So
There's a documentary about my octopus teacher or something like this.
yes, I had to turn it off because the octopus was going to die. I didn't want to see it.
I haven't watched it. I've heard so much about it. I figured
It was good until the end. I don't know. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
Did you shut Old Yeller off too?
I didn't watch Old Yeller.
Okay.
All right. Outside of your own book, what is the most impactful book on your life?
The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success by Deepak Chopra.
Awesome.
I give it as gifts. It's a very dense, it's 7 spiritual laws, so it's not very thick. It's a small book, but it's dense with content. I've read it probably 30 times. I have dates inside of it when I highlight things, and it's one of my most treasured books.
Awesome. Well, question number 3, you live in what for most people is a vacation destination. So you're already essentially on vacation every day. But if you could go anywhere in the world, where would it be?
My 2 favorite places are Africa and St. John. St. John is a U.S. Virgin Island off of St. Thomas. In fact, my brother-in-law is just buying a place and gave me the opportunity to buy a sliver of it. So I'll have 3 weeks there a year. But it is just I feel very peaceful and the most relaxed there, floating on my back, looking at sea turtles. And then Africa is it's so enormous and quiet and peaceful and beautiful. And you are this big. Yeah. And it's a humbling place to be. So if it's not on your bucket list, you got to get it on there.
Yeah.
The last person we asked that question to, by the way, answered Chicago. So that was a very different answer. I'll just say.
Yeah, that's funny.
We're both kind of shocked.
What? Yeah.
All right. What's the most adventurous thing you've done in the past 10 years?
Oh, well, it involves Africa. I went with a group and a friend, and she wanted to go to this place called Devil's Pool. It's at the top of Victoria Falls. And there's a certain time of the year where the falls are lighter, like you can actually go out to it. So we went out to this thing on a boat. Then we climbed through rocks holding hands with all these people. Then we're at the edge of the cliff with fish biting our ankles. And I hung over the side of the falls. Now, when I got back to the US and I went through customs, I was like, what in the heck was I thinking? Like, it just hit me that I was hanging over the cliff of Victoria Falls. It was just not the most great moment, but adventurous, yes.
Love it.
Last question. If you could meet one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
That is a good one. I don't know. I don't have that one at the ready,
Somebody's name came into your mind.
I mean, Jesus would be pretty awesome.
Okay.
I mean,
okay. Not bad.
what are you going to, the Dalai Lama? I mean, who, probably somebody on a spiritual level. Gandhi.
Gotcha.
Awesome.
Somebody deep.
So you made it. See, you were nervous.
I did. I feel it's a good thing I had an espresso before we started.
It humanizes things a little bit for people to understand, because obviously from a business perspective, you're in the numbers all day, every day, and so are we. It's important for people to understand that we're people too and have the same emotions. We're just trying to be that objective outside opinion to help you find. You used the language of, I think, when your emotions kind of crash into your finances, it's important to have somebody there holding your hand when those waves hit. So that being said, let's end with the book. So give the reader, or the listeners rather, the name of the book again, where they can find the book, and a reason why they might want to pick that up.
Sure. So the book is called Squeeze the Juice, Live Your Life and Leave a Legacy. And it's basically about taking care of your family and your people. It is financial light. You're going to read it and you're going to learn something, and you can leverage it in your life, but it won't hurt when you read it. You can find it on Amazon or I have a separate website for the book. It's called squeezethejuicebook.com. And the reason you should read it, so that you can be a little bit more ready to take care of your family.
Yeah. Jennifer, I love it. And again, as an author myself who wrote a book for pure educational purposes, not for the intent of making any money off of the book, because I saw a need and wanted to meet a need for people, I appreciate that your passion for your book is exactly the same. And so I would encourage the people that are listeners of our podcast regularly that have picked up my book and read it for that educational light type that you described your book, to go out and grab Jennifer's book as well and give that a read. So Jennifer, thanks for being bold enough to be on a competitor's podcast, number one. And thanks for staying fairly unscripted with us and being willing and vulnerable of answering our questions. And thanks for writing your book. Thanks for taking your passions, putting it back into your community and making a difference. It's really, really important. Money is one of those things that impacts every area of our lives, whether we want it to or not, or we admit that it does or not. So having people like yourself out there helping others is super important. So we appreciate it.
Thank you both for having me and for throwing me those questions. Keeping it exciting.
All right, Jennifer, enjoy the rest of your day. Listeners, thanks for joining this episode of Every Day is Saturday. As always, Brad Gatto, Matt Stahl. If you need any more information about podcasts, about fiat in general, you can go to our website, fiatwm.com, and find all of that information. Until then, we will see all of you next Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.